Talking Music with Big Andy. In this episode, the Mighty Orchid King are talking music with me, Big Andy. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today I have with me the two members of the Mighty Orchid King. Hello, Ray. How you doing?
Hey, everyone.
Hey, man. Hey, guys.
Welcome to the show. I've got to start off. The very first thing has got to be the name. Where does the name come from?
So we're a band that we started off in St Albans. A couple of us still live here, and it's a house that I grew up in. There was a historian came around one day and knocked on the door and was like, "Oh, did you know that this orchid king, like orchid grower, used to live here and have an orchid nursery in this building?" And I kind of knew nothing about any of this, and this was a story that my mum passed on to me, and then it kind of just was just something that was sitting there when we were kind of trying to come up with a name at the beginning, which is always the worst part.
Yeah.
Of that beginning thing. You're always like just grabbing at weird words and hoping for the best. And so that just seemed like a nice thing to be like really rooted in our, in our kind of surroundings and where we came from and stuff. And it ties into the kind of eco stuff that we sing about as well. I think it's kind of given it some roots.
When I looked at everywhere I looked, it described you as being a psych rock band.
Yeah.
With eco-anxiety flavoured jams.
Yeah.
Which
that's our marketing pitch, yeah.
Is that how you describe the music?
Yeah, I think that's probably our, get it down into a sentence kind of, because we're with everyone in a band these days is always conscious of this, like how to kind of market yourselves and how things will appear when someone's searching, and don't try and be too cool or mysterious, like make it clear what you are, so that someone finds you on Instagram, they're like, oh, okay, rather than like just something super cryptic or like.
It's always really hard. It's always really hard finding that one sentence for any project you've got, right? And I feel like the modern musician has to be sort of a marketing person as well. You can't just be a musician anymore. And so, whenever I get a chance to sit down with someone, I could go for like half an hour to an hour or longer describing the Mighty Orchid King, because if you get into like the deep cuts, because I started off as a fan before I joined the band to play bass, and I just watched them live and I was like, this is amazing. So when I got to play with them, I was like, oh, really cool. But it's, when you get into like really paying attention to it, the amount of influences are so far and wide. It's not just a psych and prog. You got bands like Queens of the Stone Age as well that you can really hear, which for me is more of like this more like hard rock American sound, which doesn't necessarily match TMOK as a whole. But I always find that interesting because of what Johnny just said. He just said, like, you don't want to appear too mysterious, right? So the real rock stars in the past, that's all they wanted to do. They could do that, right? Like Paul McCartney can still be mysterious. If he dropped a track tomorrow, I'd listen to it. But for us, we're not really rock stars ever. Even if we were to be super successful, that's never going to happen. That dream is sailed even before we were born because of the way the world works now.
I think the problem you got is that in the sort of the 60s and that sort of time, there weren't so many genres and there weren't so many little pigeonholes for people to be fitted into. So there was a lot of barrier breaking. There was a lot of things where people didn't get labelled quite as much. as they do nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It-
I think so. Like we kind of we copped a bit of flack with the album because we got a review that said like, oh, this sounds like Tame Impala and Ty Seagull if they were making the Yellow Submarine or something. And we were
Yes,
like, oh, that's great. Like, I mean, it's not really, it doesn't really work, but like, it's definitely a good like in for people seeing an ad or something. And then obviously they get there and they're like, this doesn't sound like Ty Seagull. What the hell's going on? We're like,
no,
well, we didn't say it was Ty Seagull. We just used that review. Like, you're here now. If
but
you like it, you know.
that's the other thing. I mean,
Uh,
listening to your music, I mean, I can hear the kind of psychedelic rocks sort of influences and the sort of the 60s, late 60s stylings and that sort of thing. But as you say, you can hear sort of like also in some of the songs, there's definitely an underground of like sort of hard rock sort of things to it, and progressive rock, and even sometimes it sounds a little bit like a bit of jazz and stuff like that thrown in. So it is difficult to kind of, as you say, to sum it up in one sentence.
I think
we-
that's where like psych as a term for me like feels quite open ended, and that's where it's sort of useful is because
yeah, yeah.
it
It's,
doesn't like it feels like in it's like about breaking boundaries and stuff, and we're not, you know, I don't think we're that cutting edge, but there's at least an element of just being like we're open to things that we just think are good,
yeah,
and we're not trying too hard to be a thing or, you know, like try and like copy the trappings of anything in particular. It's just like, oh, let's do this thing now, even though, you know, most people wouldn't. We just think it would be cool to you know, to throw this bit in or whatever. Like that's our philosophy generally, I think.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a recent conscious um, decision or realization, even though I've always tried to understand this. What Johnny just said, like for especially for a young musician, when you're starting off or you're creating your first musical project, I think the first aspiration is usually let's be the next different thing. Let's
yeah,
try to create something that truly doesn't sound like anyone else. And then sooner you realize that that's folly, and then there's no way of doing that, especially nowadays when there's so many brilliant artists out there. And then weirdly, sort of ironically, I think that's why TMOK sounds quite original. It's because we actually just really hold our influences on the sleeve, but there's so many of them
yeah.
that then you put them all together and it sounds weirdly different to a lot of other things.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Now, I was interested to see you started off around 2015, yeah. And according to one of the things I read, you've had nearly 20 different members of the band so far. That's quite a lot of members of the band
Yeah,
for 6 years.
it doesn't reflect well on us, does it? It makes it sound like
Yeah.
yeah, like this revolving door policy of, you know,
But I mean, the thing is, because it said in the thing you were a collective, I kind of had this feeling that maybe you were kind of made up of people who were available at the time more than being a hard and fast. You know, you have a kind of core membership of like three or four of you or something, and then anybody else that plays with you is just who's available at the time to be able to play. Is that?
yeah, that's pretty much it. I think like to be fair, again, this is another one of those things that that I think like blogs liked including because it seemed a bit different, and we'd not really removed it from our biography, even though it didn't really kind of ring true anymore. Like I think it, you know, it seemed like a nice like you know, utopian thing to be like, oh, you know, we're not a fixed entity. There's loads of people and they come and go and stuff, and like it is true to an extent, and that's more based on the realities of trying to be in a band. You know, when you're also working jobs and stuff, and just like you say about who's available, and but also we do like the thing of being like, oh, well, if we want to get someone in to come and play brass, or we want to come and get someone in to do something extra, that's always an option, and we've, you know,
Yeah.
I think we'd like to, if we could make it work, we'd like to have a lot of people on stage, you know. But part of the problem is that I'm a singing drummer as well. So like even with five of us, like a lot of the venues in London that we were playing, you couldn't see me at all. So the vocals were just appearing from, you know, like behind the wall of people, and like,
invisible drummer, invisible.
yeah.
It's funny that you say that though, Johnny, because like in the latest album, The Doctrine of Infinite Kindness, even though like there was this lineup and I played bass for 90% of the album, there's still a couple of tracks where like the bass parts had already been laid out. Who Echo Echo, who was playing bass on that? Because that was
So yeah, that Mike, who was in the band for a while and wrote, you know, quite a lot of stuff with us, and who has his own thing called Cymbal Soup. He demoed a couple of bass things on the album that we ended up just keeping because the bass was so good. But it was just literally like him just demoing it into his computer, and then every time we tried to redo it, we couldn't get it to sound as good.
It was just perfect the way it was.
So, yeah.
I think that adds to that collective feel, you know.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's something else I was going to say to you. Is it's another kind of selling point and slightly odd thing about the band, which is the fact that you got a bass player that plays saxophone as well, and you got a drummer that sings. Now, I mean, that's an unusual setup for any band.
Sure. Yeah.
There aren't that many bands that are led by singing drummers.
Yeah, I think the obvious comparisons are, you know, like Phil Collins or whatever, and we're back in prog territory.
Yeah. But
you
you're
know,
not
the
really,
Eagles
I don't
and
think
stuff,
we can really be compared to Genesis, to be honest.
We're not there yet.
There's a lot of differences.
Yeah, I mean, I've been diving in a little bit more to some of the back catalogue, but yeah, we've not quite hit our full prog mode yet. I don't think. We're still just, you know, at the outskirts.
I mean, it's the mixture of the musics that actually make you sound different and make your sound original, and you know, it's your sound. It's not just you sound like another prog rock band or whatever. Let's have a look at one of the band's videos.
How many streams does it get? Swirling, keep me afloat in the daydream. I am constantly mean. Swirling, operator, fix me. Fill my world under siege. You're right, I'm really not supposed to like this hollow act, but now my eyes are nothing on the inside. Swirling pulls the elastic under my face in unforgiving shapes. Swirling loosens the hold of the great chain while I plan my escape. You're right, I'm really not supposed to like this hollow act, but now my eyes.
But I mean, was there ever a time when you thought about having a separate singer, or have you always been? It's going to be you doing the vocals and.
Well, no, I think when we started, when the band first started, it was me and one of my oldest friends from school, and we were like, let's do it in a kind of Beatles style and just share lead vocals the whole way.
Right.
And then the kind of it only changed because I ended up doing a lot of the writing for the debut album, again, just because people weren't around to do it in the same sort of way. So that it became more about me writing songs and singing lead. But we're going back into that direction, I think, of sharing it out a bit more. We actually had this gig. When was it? The first Water Rats gig, like at the end of 2019. I mean, I can't remember when anything is anymore, but yeah.
Yeah.
We did it like the Abbey Road medley because it was the 50th anniversary, and with that we very consciously were just sharing vocals out left, right, and center, and it just created such a great feeling on stage.
And that was
party vibe that
was particularly cool because that represented a future of TMOK that has simultaneously already existed in certain ways, but then like in an idealistic future, I think would be more common for our live performances, where like Pete, he was the original bass player. I think he was the original bass player of TMOK, right?
Yeah.
And he jumped on stage and he played quite a lot of the Abbey Road bass lines whenever I hopped on sax. and then we'd still swap over. I'd go back to bass when he hopped onto piano, and so we just all shared whatever parts were more appropriate to our skills. And we added the sax into the Abbey Road medley to try to mimic some of the horns. And I think even though that was a cover that we did as a celebration of the album, it was very much a celebration of like TMOK's collective energy, because there was at one point there's like 10 people on stage, and like Johnny's sister jumped on drums and Johnny hopped on guitar. It was so that's really cool.
I think that energy on stage is a great, like, that was an eye opener for us to be like, oh, this is a good feeling on stage. Like, this feels like a cool thing to have all this movement and different people doing different things, and having lots of people on stage. You get that kind of Arcade Fire thing of, you know, there being just a ton of people making noise everywhere, and it just feels like a collective thing, you know. Like,
that's great. I mean, you'd never wanted to step out from behind the drums and stay out completely to do just the vocals.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like we're working on the second album at the moment, and I increasingly make, you know, I'm not the kind of drummer that, or singing drummer that like tries to accommodate, you know, by making easy drum parts so that I can sing. I'm just like, no, I'm making increasingly more complicated drum parts that I can't even play on their own. And at the moment, I don't have access to a kit, so I'm just programming in stuff and kind of going, yeah, I think I'll be able to work this out. But yeah, it gets to the stage where I'm kind of making it in such a weird style that I don't think I could really explain to anyone else how to play a lot of it.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm at. Like, that's the problem that I create for myself. It's like, yeah, it'd be good. Maybe I could play guitar and not have to do as much and sing and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. At the moment, it feels like it is part of the whole thing is having me on the kit. But then, you know, I recognize that there's a limitation to it as well, that people kind of expect there to be a front man who's, you know, running around doing stuff. And
but there is a selling point there, you know. I mean, it's a, you know, it's a different sort of energy that you get for the band.
Yeah.
You've got a singing drummer or something like that. The whole thing's different. So how about you with the bass and the sax? Do you play? Is there a lot of the tracks on the albums where you're playing both? And in that case, what do you do live?
So let's be honest here. So because the pandemic hit right when we were releasing the album, we haven't actually played that album live yet. So I haven't had to answer that question. Having said that, the reason why Johnny brought up the Abbey Roads medley, and I think that's a great example of like, okay, let's say we wanted to perform the album back to back, or there was a particular lineup that required that kind of swaparoo. There are a few options I think we've considered, like putting some things, because the keyboard player plays bass really, really well as well. So we're all multi-instrumentalists. So like if there was ever a track that we could put like a bit of the synths on the backing track, the keyboard player jumps on bass, I jump on sax, and then we swap back round. Or, you know, for a special event, you know, get Pete, the original bass player, to come back in whenever he can, because he's such a jam monster. You know, it's so cool. And I mean, I do think there's an element to this that is Johnny being a little bit modest. He would never obviously ever say this out loud, but I feel like I can, because I was a fan of the band before I joined it. I genuinely think he's one of the best drummers I've ever met. Like, there's drummers that you know out there in the wide mainstream, and then there's those like people that are in your musical community, but you actually get to touch them. They're in flesh. They're real people. And Johnny's such a good drummer. I know, because I'm a drummer as well, and I suck compared to him. And I look at what he does, and I'm like, well, I think you'd struggle to ever find someone who could, let alone would want to put in all that effort into the drums.
Fair enough. So, I mean, what stuff before the lockdown and all that sort of thing? What were you doing in the way of gigging and that sort of thing? Did you manage to do much in the way of sort of tours and things, or I wasn't sure if you mainly be doing festivals and things like that?
We'd started to kind of get a few more offers of that kind of thing. Again, we were still like in our kind of early stages of working out how we were playing a lot of these songs live, and like Marcel was saying, some of it, you know, we suddenly, having been like a very organic, we just 4 people playing music, we suddenly started bringing more electronic stuff in, and then like I'm suddenly playing off click for some of it, which was like a whole new, you know, world for me. and another thing to be thinking about was like, oh yeah, there's all this weird synth I programmed in my ears and my vocals, and like, so we were just getting used to that. But in terms of the gigs, like Marcelo for a long time had been doing these like DIY nights and stuff, and that was an angle that we'd kind of started going down much more, was being like, let's run our own things. So, and Marcelo did most of that, you know, like he was booking these nights at the Water Rats, and then we could just put on a bill of bands that were in our kind of community and know that like everyone was invested in it. You weren't going to show up at a gig where a promoter's put 15 completely unrelated bands on, and the audience doesn't have any interest in sticking around to see, you know, the other ones that they didn't come to see, kind of thing. And like,
those nights were really epic because it felt like we were starting to create a community. B, we were actually gigging regularly for a change, creating our own sort of nights. And we were never being like double crossed by the promoters. I think it also spawned not only of wanting to create community, but also always feeling like every promoter in London is out to get you as opposed to actually support you. And then there was a point where like the nights were starting to break even, so we could even pay ourselves and the other bands to be part of it. So we're like, all right, this is sustainable, this is working. The only problem was that for the really good venues, the really small venues, we kept getting kicked out because we were just too loud. And then for the big venues, like there was this one night at the Water Rats where like we sold out the Water Rats. Like there was 220 people there. People were stuck outside. It was amazing. And then the next time it was still pretty packed. And they were like, this is cool, potentially sustainable. The third time it was like not as full, you know. And then we're like, okay, maybe we don't quite have the sort of support yet to keep doing it at such a big venue. So I think
every month as well. It was
and every month, it was a monthly thing. So I think for the future, it's a question of finding that ideal sweet spot venue, you know, or you know, who knows? We'd love to get back on the actual gigging circuit with promoters that we could actually trust. That'd be really great.
Here's another video clip. The album, the Doctrine of Infinite Kindness, that how long did that take for you to record? Were you doing it in studio? Were you doing it home recording, or?
A bit of both. We let me think. So we did a lot of the in fact we did all the drum tracking with a guy, Tom Hill, that we've done a lot of different stuff with. We split that between resident studios where he used to work, and then he opened his own studio in South London called Bookhouse Studios.
Right.
And we've lots of our kind of related projects have done stuff. So Marcelo's thing, the Vone, we've recorded, you know, quite a few singles there with Tom. And so yeah, we did drum and bass tracking with Tom at the Book House, and then everything else was in Will, who's our keyboard player, but also who produced it. It was just at his house, more or less. Like, in fact, I did all the vocals at my house, so I did them like in my bedroom because I kind of want to take ages overdoing them and hate the idea of booking in a day and being, you know, like I just kind of, it took me quite a long time to get them all done, basically. So and we did all the guitar overdubs and stuff at Will's, so it was sort of split between, you know, doing it a bit live and a bit sort of layered.
So you finished that before lockdown?
Yeah, that was done by like January of last year.
So what have you been doing in lockdown? I mean, have you been working on any new material, or have you been doing anything?
Well, yeah, I mean, we kind of, like everyone, we didn't really know, and like obviously like a lot of big bands sort of held off on releasing albums because they were just like, oh, this will blow over, like we'll put it out next year and do the world tour. And then, you know, now they're all kind of releasing them anyway because they've realized that maybe that's not, you know, so near. And we were just like, well, we want to have something out. We've kind of already, you know, promised that we've got this thing coming. Let's not delay it anymore. And to be fair, like I think both of us, for our, you know, for Marcelo, for his stuff as well, we were both saying that like having that quiet time was actually really handy to learn much more about the marketing side of things, because, you know, we were doing it all ourselves, so we both kind of geeked up on, you know, Facebook ads and like all that kind of stuff. So we, you know, there was definitely like quite a few months where I was just spending a lot of time learning about that and not doing so much creative stuff, and then started working towards the next album, which we're now, you know, a few months out from recording that. So we've kind of, I mean, because the band's obviously been going quite a while and we've not put out that much stuff, there's a whole lot of things that have sort of accumulated and all sorts of old jams and things that, you know, like we've finally started working on with a bit more direction. So yeah, over the last sort of 3 or 4 months, I've been pretty much solidly working on the next stuff and kind of sharing stuff with the guys, and we've started doing Zoom rehearsals now to try and try and work through stuff.
What's funny is that Martin, one of the OG members of TMOK and one of the lead guitarists as well, he you know, as with all of us, he was a bit reticent. He's like, I'm not really feeling the Zoom rehearsal thing. I mean, another Zoom call. And then after like the third session, he was like, even him, I mean, all of us were like, I hate to admit how useful these Zoom sessions actually are.
Technology is actually kind of good sometimes.
Sometimes they can work.
It's just like, you know, it's one of those things that it's, when you're first writing and trying to learn new parts and stuff, it's quite an awkward rehearsal stage to be at, because particularly at the, you know, like ideally we'd work on all the writing stuff more collectively, but because of the way that things have gone, you know, like a lot of it's just been me demoing things, and it's always quite awkward being, you know, and I'm trying to avoid it, but being too prescriptive about like, I've written this guitar part, like play it like this. And so in some ways the Zoom thing, we were saying, like when we did one last night, it kind of enables us all to like have a bit of time to learn it while you're showing someone else something, and it doesn't feel too much like I'm in the spotlight trying to, you know, learn this thing whilst everyone watches and waits for me to do it, kind of thing.
Because the mute function is the most valuable thing on Zoom. In a real rehearsal, you know, you can't practice your part without listening to everybody else practice their part, and you're definitely put in the spotlight. Oh, Marcelo can't get the bass line right, and then everybody's just waiting for me to get it right before we move on. So it's a bit easier on Zoom, actually, in that sense.
Always used to be the thing, the band I was in, we had 2 guitarists. There was always the thing where it'd be one of the guitarists saying to the other one, could you stop playing while I'm trying to tune up?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the ongoing struggle, isn't it? Like,
Well, I mean, it says in a couple of things that your music's very jam inspired. So do you kind of do these kind of jams and then say, oh, that bit sounds good, let's try and work on that as a song?
I feel like I've got a story to answer that question. I think I need to take this one. Andy, the first time I got invited to go to like a test rehearsal with the Mighty Orchid King, they were at that time about to put out a single called Beacon, which is on Spotify and Apple Music and all your favorite streaming platforms. And Johnny was like, take a look at the single just in case, because we're probably gonna look at it. It's what we're working on at the moment. And so I'd learned the parts and I'd written down like the bar numbers because it has a lot of weird structures. So I was really struggling to memorize the order of the song. And I was quite nervous for my first rehearsal. I turn up, I'm all prepared. I'm like, let's do this. I plug in my bass and the five of us just start playing music. And for 45 minutes, not a word is said. Johnny has the recorder on his phone on and we just play music nonstop, we just jam. And then at the end, we were getting close to the end of the rehearsal. I was like, oh, we should probably look at the song, I guess, at this point. And I know that Johnny then listens to those jams and the composition sort of spring from those 45-hour-long inspired moments where we're all just in the zone together.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's cool. That's cool. It's an interesting way to put songs together.
it's weird because like, and I'm doing it more at the moment with jams that are like really old. There's some stuff that were from rehearsals in like 2016 or something, and you listen back and you're like, oh, there's a magic to this recording of the thing that we never played ever again. And then you're sort of trying to reverse engineer something that was spontaneous and going, oh, do you remember how to play this bit? And it's like, well, no, not really, because we just sort of did it. And you kind of, like you almost feel like, oh, if you didn't record it properly, then it's kind of hard to almost go. Like I'm always kind of aspire to one day do a recording like the kind of Miles Davis electric stuff, like when he just basically just goes into a studio and goes, okay, we're gonna just play, and the engineer's gonna put it together at the end, like from all the hours of stuff that we've done.
Yeah. The whole day just jamming, and they sort of like pick bits out that the song. Yeah,
which I mean, because it's just like you listen back and you're like, oh, there's so many things on this that we can't even really work out what was going on, and but it's also it is somehow those songs that come about like that always feel a bit more like organic, and they just, I don't know, when you play them again, they just feel like that you can really kind of embody them somehow, and they don't feel forced, and they just like, those are the songs that are always the best to play.
Yeah,
because they've just come out in that natural way somehow, and everyone's playing something that they came up with, rather than, again, like me saying, here's a guitar solo I wrote, like, learn this.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I really like that idea of it being that kind of spontaneous sort of creativity, rather than, as you say, that prescriptive kind of, it's got to be this kind of thing and it's got to sound this way.
Yeah.
And I've got to touch on the fact that your songs do have a kind of eco message behind them. And there was something saying about the fact that you have experience with Extinction Rebellion. Now, I'm just wondering, and I'm just being kind of devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of downside to being connected with a kind of politicized movement that maybe some people don't agree with the way they work and the way they are? I mean, have you found any downside to it at all?
I mean, I don't think we've ever had any kind of, at no point has anyone really kind of brought that up as a kind of, oh, this is weird that you're doing this. But then obviously, we don't have a huge following. There's not a lot of people to kind of to betray, so to speak. It's not like we suddenly just went, oh, we're a political band now. We kind of set our store up quite early in terms of well, these are the things that we feel passionate about, and this is the kind of music that we make that's inspired by this. And so I don't think it was like we suddenly changed tack. And yeah, I think, in terms of that movement as a whole, like obviously there's been a lot of valid criticism since in the aftermath of the initial sort of rebellions and stuff. I think from a subjective experience, it was an amazing, and this is beyond the kind of issue, like it was an amazing feeling being part of that as a movement, as someone that hadn't really done that much kind of protest stuff before. It was again, almost like the whole spontaneous jam thing of feeling like suddenly you're involved in something kind of bigger than yourself, and that feels like that's a kind of uplifting feeling. And I know that's not the main issue. It's not like let's go and do this to make ourselves feel good.
I think there's something to be said about echo chambers as well, and the fact that TMOK has started, from the moment we started cultivating the audience and the audience has started to grow, that idea of us caring about the environment from an actual practical perspective, not just singing about it, was already imbued into the brand. And so the good side is that the people that you end up attracting already care. They might already be on board with something like Extinction Rebellion. The bad side might be that you're preaching to the converted. But at the same time, we have reached quite, there are people all over the world listening to TMOK on Spotify right now, and that's reassuring. And some people need those voices as well. They need to feel like, there's someone else who cares equally as much about this. And then from a more Extinction Rebellion side of that question, like Johnny said, we haven't had necessarily any backlash. But at the same time, I feel like we can't ever sing about something without backing it up with action. Like I'm still very much involved with Extinction Rebellion, and what I love about it is that while there's a couple of controversial actions which form the very minority of what happened that get highlighted by the media, which is not wrong, it's what happened and people want to know, oh look, that went wrong. I'm not necessarily doing a criticize the media spiel here, but what I am saying is that so much about it is about community. And I think that reflects TMOK in a nice way as well. Like one of the events we had lined up right before the pandemic hit was the album launch. It was actually the Doctrine of Infinite Kindness launch, which was also, I think that was it, right, Johnny? And then parallel to that, it was going to be a fundraiser for a local group of Extinction Rebellion. And the cool thing about that is that we were going to have school kids coming over. We were going to have an art block workshop. It wasn't just psych bands. There were burlesque acts. There were comedy acts. And there was a real sense of family community starting to build up for the event, which is the consequence of like the TMOK brand wanting to really pair up with the Extinction Rebellion. And those events create awareness, even, arguably as much as the protests in some way with the local community, with really positive events, that people are showing up to because they want to be there. So I think that also represents a different facet of how we're connected to it that usually makes people feel quite happy about it.
And also like in a massive way that it kind of it informs how we feel about being in a band in the modern day, in terms of like what our awareness of the limitations are, and whether we'd ever really want to go and do a world tour and all these kind of things that there's obvious contradictions in, and those are the areas of it that I get annoyed about, is where you see like massive bands going, oh, we support Extinction Rebellion, and you go, well, yeah, but like how much is it really informing? And I understand that the kind of finances of the music industry are basically impossible anyway. So to suddenly say, oh, you can't make records because of this, and you can't go on tour because of this, it's like, well, where are we making money? Yeah. But these are the kind of things that that where we're trying to think seriously about that. That's why we haven't put out any merch or records yet, because we wanted to do that in the best way possible, and we're looking into the kind of eco mix vinyls and organic t-shirts and all these kind of things that, again, we're still making stuff and there's still a cost to that, but it's it's not like let's just raise the flag of this and then just carry on doing things as normal, and like we are serious about bringing it into our own lives and stuff as well.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I've got no problem with Extinction Rebellion. I've got no problem with the whole eco movement or anything like that. I I think when you set out, as you say, when you set out your stall, you set out this thing saying we are a band that has this kind of political edge or side to the way we think, the way we work, and the music we make. You're always at risk of possibly alienating a certain amount of people who don't agree with your political stance. And I mean, it's just a matter, as I say, being devil's advocate, of just finding out how you deal with that and how you go with that. But obviously, it's something that's integral to your beliefs and the way that you guys work, and that's a great thing. It's great that you've thought about it and that it is a big part of what you do.
And it felt like we couldn't avoid it. And like I think I did grow up feeling like political music was somehow a bit like there was something not great about it, because it there's always that like side of fans and people that sort of say, oh, like music should be just music and art should just be art, and we shouldn't be politicized and shouldn't be this. And the more that you, or at least for us, the more that we kind of learn and experience these different things, and the more scared we became about how things were going, it just sort of felt like you can't separate things out to that extent and depoliticize everything, because this is just meant to be a something to listen to. I don't want it to have a meaning, or like, because then it's like, where do you draw the line? Should it have any meaning at all if it's just meant to be like candy for your ears that just feels good? But like, yeah,
to be honest, my opinion is that there is a political element to any creative aspect, because there has to be, because you have to bring a certain amount of your own experience, your own world into it, or you have to be aware of how what you create is affecting the outside world. And both of those things have it's political with a small p sometimes, but it's still a political sort of edge.
Absolutely. I think it's really important. I completely agree with you, Andy. I would take it a step further and say, without it being a provocative thing and without it being an overwhelming thing, I think there's politics in every conversation you have. The moment you engage with a human, there's politics there. They're not party politics, but they're politics nonetheless. And I mean, me and Johnny have spent so many hours actually talking about this, and like I love it. We sometimes sitting with a beer and we're like, how would you react if you got the record deal of your dreams and you could tour the world, and what would the politics of that be, and what would you really do if you had the opportunity? And we both agree that actually at the end of the day you probably do what you can for your music career, but being aware of these things I think is a very important step, even if some things are at this moment in time unfixable. Knowing our position in the wider world, I think is a useful and a fun thing as well. I like the idea of sort of I think the expression is destigmatizing, or just like not putting so much weight on the word politics. People often think politics aren't to be discussed. I disagree. I think like they're the best thing to discuss, except we just need to be really good listeners, and we need to like engage with all the other sides that you're gonna find. So yeah, there are going to be people that will be alienated. There's no doubt about that. But I also think that's unavoidable. And a lot of bands become really successful by not upsetting anyone, and that works for them, and that can be an interesting experience as well, I'm sure. But then I feel like it's impossible. There's an expression we say in Portuguese: it's impossible to please Greeks and Trojans. Right? Like at some point, someone's going to get upset, no matter how much you try to please everyone. Right. And so it's a bit of that in my head as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I forgot what I was going to say then. I was going to say something then. It's gone. Never mind. Oh, yes. Have you had any interest at all from any record labels or things like that? And also, have you had much in the way of interest from radio stations or places in playing your music? I know you've got it on a lot of the streaming platforms and all that kind of thing, but any radio airplay and audience to say interest from labels at all?
Yeah, I mean, we've just agreed a deal with a local label who are based in St Albans called 3Ms, and they've pretty much just finished building a studio not far from at all from where I live, like in the woods. So it's kind of the perfect setting for us as a band, you know, like when we're kind of getting much more into that in terms of what we're writing about and stuff. So that was just a kind of, you know, that all fell into place not too long ago, which was ideal for us, having somewhere so nearby. And yeah, radio stuff. We struggled in terms of in this country. We've not had that much luck with like we got a few plays on amazing radio. We kind of not got anywhere with BBC Introducing, although we've had a lot of kind of support from Fresh on the Net, the Tom Robinson music blog. But actually, like most of our kind of where we're getting picked up seems to be in Europe and in South America and stuff. And you know, maybe this is just a thing about, you know, the style of music that we're making or whatever. But yeah, like one of the national stations in radio in Spain, like Radio 3, a guy called Julio Rodinas played us there a couple of times. We got played a few times on another one in Germany. And so yeah, like you know, we were kind of trying to use that stuff then when we were plugging the next single to be like, you know, to take back to the BBC Introducing thing, but we still got nowhere. And you know, I don't know. I think it's difficult with those shows because a lot of them are you know, like quite genre based and stuff. You know, like the one in our area in Hertfordshire and stuff feels quite poppy, and you know, whenever I listen to it, I'm just like, I don't see where our music would fit in, or where, you know, whoever's picking this stuff would probably wouldn't be into what we're doing. So
it's difficult. But it is the whole genre thing. I mean, I know guys who've had stuff. They've put out records and they've sent tapes and things into rock shows and been told that they won't play their stuff because of the fact they've got too much of their keyboards.
Right.
Not music, because it's all keyboards. You kind of go, well,
it's such a bizarre, like, random thing to hone in on, and like, it sounds more like you're kind of picking music for an advert or something when you're like, oh, it has too much minor scale. We can't play that on our radio station. It's not right. This is the major scale hour. It's too modal, man. Fans won't be into it.
We can't play anything that doesn't consist of power chords.
Yeah. It's a weird, I mean, and we kind of had stuff like that. Like there's a site that is pretty useful from time to time, but it still feels like not a great way for the industry to go for indie bands, called Submit Hub. Right. Where you can pay basically to submit your songs to blog writers to hopefully have them write about it on their page and stuff. And often, like, you get feedback quite like that. Like, they're just, it's almost like there are kind of strange things that they've got as criteria. Like, oh, if it's got this in it, then we can't consider it on our page. Yeah. And again, it's like that thing that you were saying about, it's just like music just then becomes more and more atomized, because it's like, oh no, we know our listeners won't be into it if, you know, it has this thing in it. So
I find that so fascinating, because I don't think I've ever had a conversation with someone where I've said, what kind of music do you like? And the answer hasn't been, oh, I've got eclectic taste. I mean, the amount of times I hear people say that, and I was like, okay, so then what's defining these genre things? Is it purely because of the mechanics of it? Because algorithms are supposed to give you more of what you like, we need to put into boxes, because otherwise we'd never be able to sort things into the respective algorithms. Or is it not mechanics? Is it like some overlord wants it to be like this, you know? or people maybe do have specific tastes, but they like the idea that they have eclectic taste when really they don't, you know? I think I'm one of those people, for example. I love rock music. I listen to jazz, I listen to a bit of electronic, but really my taste isn't that eclectic. You listen to my stuff that's on repeat, and it's pretty much all rock and roll. Do you know what I mean?
I think the thing as well is that you get this strange thing, which is the fact that there is a mindset within broadcasting that certain things are true even when they're not. Because I mean, from a film point of view, from my other love, which is film and filmmaking, is the fact that it took years And even when you had a thing where the top 5 best-selling movies in the world for 1 year were all science fiction, TV stations were still saying that science fiction was a minority interest. And you go, well, how can that be?
Yeah, I
Just
find
doesn't add
that
up,
very
yeah.
interesting. Yeah, like I read like 3 articles. I was trying to look about stuff about like how many people actually listen to metal on Spotify, and I couldn't find the stat because the stat kept changing from source to source. But I saw about 3 articles saying that in 2018, metal was the fastest growing genre on Spotify, and I was like, wow, okay, I didn't know that. And then recently in 2020, I was speaking to like a marketing guru, and he was like, oh yeah, you're part of the smallest genre on Spotify. The least amount of users listen to your genre, and I was like, oh, okay, because I've got my own project. Johnny mentioned the Vone, and we're not really a metal band, but that we often get
Yeah.
categorized as that. And so I just find that interesting. Like genres are a bit mind bending. Like it's like humans like want to put things into boxes and label things, and so we create all these little labels. But then at the end of the day, you still can't truly know, okay, what are people actually listening to? What are their actual tastes as far as what their identity is? What do they consider that they like, you know?
The problem is that it gets broken down into such smaller and smaller boxes. You end up with like each band has their own genre almost.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like, that's ridiculous. Why can't we just call it music?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Here's some more of their music.
What if the world knew how to tell you so? I think I found another piece of the puzzle in the river wide. Do you struggle so? Just lie back and let these feelings wash you away. If there's peace in all of this, I'll have it all. My shoulders ache, uncontrollable.
So where from here? That's the question. Where do you want to take things with the band? I mean,
I think like the guiding principle in general is probably maintaining a healthy sense of independence in terms of, well, you know, being free to do what we want to do
yeah,
creatively and stuff. Like that's always been a big thing. Like we don't feel like we want to be told that we have to do one thing or the other. And again, that comes back to what I was saying about like our very loose definition of psych being like, you know, just kind of boundaries are open and you can just do whatever you want. Yeah, I mean, you know, that we'd kind of, you know, it feels like, to use the nasty word, there is obviously like a market for smaller bands of a similar kind of style to ours, where, you know, that have kind of got a cult following and stuff. Like some of our favorites recently, King Gizzard and the OCs and bands like that, where they're not obviously commercial music, but they have super loyal cult followings, play pretty big gigs and stuff, and you know, yeah, I mean, I think we're aware that we're not making, you know, like chart music and stuff, and there's a limitation to how far any rock band can get these days. I think in general, you know, like I think the kind of the days of stadium bands are probably receding, and that's probably a good thing as well. I mean, like, I don't think many people love going to stadium gigs, and so yeah, I think we want. I think one of the other things is like a lot of those other bands I was mentioning, like we like the idea of being prolific, making lots of things, responding to things as we see them, and not and not trying to kind of like kind of spend years trying to make some sort of masterpiece or whatever. We want to kind of play as a band more, record the sound of us as musicians in a room, and that's the kind of the thing. But definitely, we'd love to tour and play more places and get to some of the places that seem to be listening to our music on Spotify more than they are in this country, for sure. So like,
I mean, I think that your stuff would go. I mean, to me, it's almost perfect for festivals because people like big music at festivals. They like music that kind of goes places, not just sort of like 3-minute pop songs.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They like music that kind of expands and goes places and does stuff because they get into it more. You're spending a whole day watching bands. You want bands that you can kind of get into.
I think definitely a lot of it was written with that in mind, that being the setting. Having grown up going to festivals all the time.
Yeah,
I think that's probably what's in my head most often when I'm writing music is like, what would this sound like if we were playing it, on the Pyramid stage, or
absolutely.
Like it's hard not to to have that in the back of your mind. And I think that's, again, that to me, like, feels very much like it defines our sound generally. It feels like that we're making music that we want lots of people to hear, and it's part of that big community thing that I guess again, inspired from sort of watching old footage of Woodstock and Isle of Wight back in the day, and sort of angling it towards that in a way, the kind of hippie thing.
I mean, you guys know the actor Bill Murray. I feel like for a humongous part of his career, if not all of it, he never had an agent, which for an actor is like, how did you do it, right? Yeah. I feel like if anything, TMOK could aim for the rock and roll equivalent of Bill Murray's career, because like things like Patreon and all these different like ways of funding artists have changed, and then they're going to continue to revolutionize the music industry, especially as the genres keep subdividing. For all you know, there will be 1,000 diehard people who like TMOK specific psych, whatever the full term will be, and then that's it. Some people say all you need is 1,000 fans, right? And so as much as I think we want the tours or the venues or the audience live to keep on organically growing and then share the music with the community festival style, I also think we can somehow retain that independence, not just creative, but like that collective feel, in the way that, Johnny will show up and you'll be like, check out this amazing jam we've got. Usually the other band members are going to be like, what the hell is this? How are we ever going to play it? And then somehow organically, even when it's this crazy process where it's pandemic and Johnny's, programming some stuff at home on his own, I think there still is an organic level of like, actually, can we repeat that bridge? Can we cut this section? Can we add some horns here? And that's what being in a band's all about at the end of the day. So yeah, here's the indie artists, right?
Absolutely. That's what this is all about. It's getting, hopefully introducing the artists to people who may not have come across their stuff before. Thank you very much for joining me on here today. It's been great talking to you. I really like your music. It kind of feeds into my kind of old prog rock sort of psychedelic stuff. When I was younger, getting into all that kind of stuff. But I really like the sound of it, and I hope you do really well with it. And I hope that in a few years' time, I see you on the Pyramid stage doing your thing.
That's the dream, man. That's for sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, man.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody for tuning into the podcast. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much. Bye. Talking Music with Big and